Tonight's subject will be the controversial issue of how the rabbis perceived women. Specifically, what were they thinking when they included the bracha of thank you God for not making me a woman, along with thank you God for not making me a slave, and thank you God for not making me a non-Jew. What were they thinking? Clearly they were not interested in political correctness. They've been very happy with Trump. I don't know, he's probably not, because he's not intellectually on their level, but with, being politically incorrect and just saying what you want to say. Now, what we're talking about tonight is there a prevailing attitude in Judaism of the inferiority of women, and thank God I'm not a woman? Is there a prevailing attitude of the inferiority of non-Jews and slaves? That's really the question. And I just want to point out that this bracha of not making me a woman is an ancient bracha that was predated the early Second Temple era when the tefillah, the prayer service, was organized. They just took what was already being said for a very long time and put it in its right place in the order of the tefillah. So it's an ancient bracha. It goes back a long time. Very endemic to the Jewish people. Very, very, original. So our talk tonight and our perspective on this, the way we're going to frame this whole topic, how we're going to look at it, what we're going to explain about it, the ideas we're going to learn tonight are ideas that were taught to me by my father-in-law's Rav Zalman, or Shmuel Ephraim ben Harav Naftali Yitzchak, Wein. It's in his Shloshim now. He was buried a week ago today in Eretz Yisrael. And Le'iloi Nishmaso, we will learn his ideas. I remember where I was standing when he said to me, well, don't you see that it's like this? And he explained his point of view, and I remember standing there thinking, yeah, of course that's what it is. And I never thought of it like that. And everything he said elicited that response of, I never thought of it like that. He was a creative genius. And I was fortunate that he shared much of his ideas with me, and there is a hesped of him on Torah Anytime already that it's under I think its own category. It's hesped for Shmuel Ephraim Wein, and we spoke about his ideas about Yosef and Paro's dreams in that shir. And here's another contribution towards the, I guess, hopefully growing category of ideas of Rav Zalman Wein. So first, in analyzing this bracha of Shelo Asani Isha, it's part of a little group, like we just mentioned, of two others, Shelo Asani Eved and Shelo Asani Goy. Thank you for not making me a slave, and thank you for not making me a woman. Now, let's analyze it this way. We'll work with the slave first. When the Jewish people say, thank you God, you did not make me a slave, does that mean, and prove your point, I'm going to ask you to answer, does that mean that the Jews are pro-slavery? Thank you for not making me a slave. Does that mean we discriminate against slaves? We are pro-slavery. We think slaves are inferior. Yes or no? What do you say? No. Why? And it's clear. Why not?
Because we treat slaves
Very good. So in the parsha of, it comes right after the parsha of the giving of the Torah, the parsha of Mishpatim, right after Yisro, is the entire discussion of what we do with slaves. First of all, the tragedy of somebody becoming a slave is deeply understood by the Torah. It is understood to such a degree that, first of all, among Jews, the only way a person can become a slave is if they are so poor that they sell themselves into slavery, or they are so poor that they stole and they can't pay back, so they work off their debt. Each case, this is a desperate person. Because this person is desperate and is now in a position where they are humiliated by being someone else's worker, okay? The Torah then goes on to list all the precautions we have to take and all the areas where we have to be sensitive in order not to further tamper with the slave's sense of self-esteem, of kavod. So, for example, Torah says that if it happens that you buy a slave which, by the way, we'll see is like an act of great chesed, right? To bring this this person in your household. If you buy a slave, what are some of the rules that we are very, very familiar with? And Rav Hirsch and Rav Shamshon Fal Hirsch goes into great discussion of this. So what are some of the rules?
You have to feed them.
Of course you have to feed them.
No, they set free after a number of
First of all, they get free at Shemitah, unless they're so happy they don't want to go.
If there's only one of something, you have to give it to them.
One of what? Certain things.
I think,
A pillow. If there's one pillow in the house, the slave gets it like an honored guest, like a hush of guests has come to your house and you give them the one pillow that the house has. Okay, what else? So back in the day when you had black bread and white bread, and the white bread was the more, the more,
like today.
unlike today, the white bread was the more respectable one. You gave the slave your white bread and you ate the cruddy old black bread. Okay? You could not have the slave do any work other than what he was skilled in. You couldn't have him carry your bags. Like, you go to see people in golf and some nebuch guy is carrying the golf clubs. If that was your slave, you couldn't do that. You're not allowed to let him carry your stuff. Let him carry your stuff. It's humiliating. It's a denigration of their kavod.
They also get Shabbat off, don't they?
Yes, they can't work on Shabbos, 100%. Now, on this, so clearly the Torah, and we're just giving a smattering of examples. The Torah is not expressing or having us in any way think that there are the haves and the have-nots and too bad, and we can, in a survival of the fittest. There's nothing like that. It is, these people are in a compromised situation, and because we're so sensitive to that, and we're so hurt ourselves over their lack of, self-esteem, that the situation that they're put in, we're going out of our way to restore to them the kavod that has been taken away from them, the dignity, and make them feel important and rehabilitate them, build them up as important people so that when the period of slavery is over, they go into the world feeling, developed and respectable, not broken down, etc. So that when you send them out after their 7 years, if you buy them in the very beginning and they stay the whole time, it's a full 7 years. It could be less, obviously. You have to send them out with money and all kinds of things to help them get on their feet. That's number one. What about non-Jews? Thank you for not making me a non-Jew. Yeah, so that means we discriminate, we look down on them, we're better than them, too bad on you, right? How does that work? What are some of the laws that kind of help us understand through the law itself what our relationship with non-Jew is? So let's go back to slaves. What if you had a not Jewish slave? How do you have to treat him? So the halacha is in the Torah that if you as much as knock out one tooth, they're free forever because you're overstepping your boundaries. They're not your property, period. Okay? If a slave runs away because you were too harsh, it is forbidden, usher, for anyone who finds that non-Jewish slave to return to his master. Forbidden. They have to protect them and shield and hide them. Okay? That's a non-Jewish slave, and the Torah is so sensitive to them. Alrighty? So, and what about a regular non-Jew? They rest on Shabbos. Okay? Your animals rest on Shabbos. You have to feed your animals before you feed yourself. Otherwise it's Sar Balachayim, right? The Torah is extremely sensitive to anything, even a creature that is vulnerable, that doesn't have its own freedom to do what it wants. When a non-Jew lives among the Jews in Israel, okay, which is the way it should be, no, they can't practice their religion. One of the rules of being a non-Jew in Israel is they have to follow the 7 mitzvahs of Noah. They're forced to. Anyone who lives in Israel as a resident has to follow the 7 mitzvahs of Noah, which is basically don't kill and don't steal and don't commit adultery and don't serve idols and be just and have a court system and don't blaspheme God. I mean, it's the basics, okay? But nevertheless, being a minority in Israel is difficult, okay? You're not among the majority. You don't have as many rights as the Jews themselves. However, you are treated with respect. If a non-Jew, here's a classic example, the halacha, we probably all know this. If a non-Jew accidentally gives you back too much change, technically you might not have to return it. If they made a mistake, and they don't even know they made a mistake. However, Chazal tell us, the rabbis all paskin, they decide you must give back the money. Because you have to deal with the person, with respect, and you have to, for shalom, you don't want them getting angry at you, and you don't want them thinking that you're a cheater, and that you don't care about their situation, so you give it back. And my grandfather was my grandfather Shimon Schwab, very makbid on honesty, especially when it came to non-Jews. One time my uncle came home with like 5 extra cents from the subway fare that somehow he ended up not having to pay. Or he found on the street or something. So my grandfather said, we're going back to the teller, they bought the tokens directly, and we're going to say this, we found this money and it's not ours, and I'm putting my yarmulke and my beard in the window so he sees I'm Jewish. He wanted them to understand that we're not taking advantage of you. We have no interest in taking advantage of you. You may not speak Lashon Hara just against a person if they're not Jewish. You may make fun of avodah zarah, of idolatry, or nonsense, mythology, things like this. But you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara. You're not allowed to do onas devarim, humiliate someone or hurt a person if they're not Jewish. So what does this mean, shelo asani eved, shelo asani goy, and obviously, shelo asani isha? What it doesn't mean is, we're better, ha-ha on you, we're discriminating, you're the weaker one, and, that's how it is. It's not what it means.
They don't have the Torah and we do.
So, if you look at it from this perspective, what we have to say is, and I remember when my father explained this to me, the Chazal, the rabbis, were making it very clear. Women are at a disadvantage. Period. They are at a disadvantage for many reasons, and it makes life harder for them. And because it makes life harder for them, and we're very aware of that, just like the slave and just like the non-Jew, we are going out of our way to restore the dignity that is so easily taken away or denied women. So, how did it happen that women are at a disadvantage? That's where we are going to start. If you go back to the creation story, okay? Back to the creation story, you see that early on in the story, in the proverbial, and this is a very, very deep and mystical idea, but let's take it on a most superficial level, even though it's really not. You really can't think of the Garden of Eden as like Dr. Seuss having, the truffula trees, and it's really much more. It's really a description of the depths of the human psyche and human motivation and human, the whole world that the human inhabits is, also really the story of the Garden of Eden. But back there in the Garden of Eden, there was a situation which was the perfection. Everything you needed grew from trees. You just walked outside and picked what you needed and ate, and everything was perfect, and everything was peaceful, and everything was in place, and nobody needed, there was no effort necessary, and everything was just, utopic. Okay? But then there was the sin, which is a whole subject in and of itself. And after the sin, what happens? If you look at the Torah, after the sin, Hashem says to the woman and to the man the following. To the man he says, with the sweat of your brow will you eat bread. B'zeyat apecha tochal lechem. This is all new. You're going to have to work hard, exert yourself in order to eat, to survive in the physical world. No, the physical world is not just going to hand you everything on a silver platter anymore. You're not going to have everything growing from trees. You just walk outside, it's always summer, everything's always ripe, it has all its nutrients, and that's it. No, you're going to have to work hard. There's going to be thorns and thistles growing, even though you'd prefer that it would be wheat. You thought you planted wheat, but thorns and thistles are coming up. And it's not going to be so easy. And bread's not going to grow on trees. You're going to have to work hard for it. Now, so number one, physical survival suddenly became physically difficult and needed physical strength and physical stamina and physical exertion. Then he goes to the woman and he says, you will be weakened, by menstruation, the whole cycle, childbirth, nursing. You will now have great struggle in childbearing. And we understand that. Again, since 12 years old, 13 years old, the constant cycle that weakens us and debilitates us physically, emotionally, and then pregnancy, childbirth, rearing children, nursing children. Suddenly you have a world where the woman is being weakened on a regular basis, okay? And physically compromised on a regular basis. You can't run if the enemy's coming when you're 9 months pregnant, or you have a baby nursing, or the guy gets on a horse and he's off. What does a woman do with babies? Or who's pregnant or whatever, right? So the woman is physically weakened. The man now, physical survival is a function of physical strength and stamina. How are you going to do it? Well, clearly what has to happen now is a division of labor. If I'm physically weaker and I'm constantly on a regular basis being debilitated, and physical survival takes physical strength, you're a guy and you're strong, you don't have these issues, you go to the fields and I'll raise the kids. That's it. That's you get this division of labor. There was no division of labor in Gan Eden. Who needed anybody to help anybody? You picked food off the tree, everybody was strong, nobody was weak, and everybody was equal. This whole condition of women being physically weaker and dependent on men for survival and even protection from other men, from rapists and conquerors and who knows what, and tribes that would come in and gangs. Women being physically weaker have now become dependent on the stronger man who can procure the food and who can choose to give it to her or not. You automatically have an imbalance in the system. That's it. The system is imbalanced. Now, this has deep, deep spiritual levels of the female becoming dependent on the male when originally the female was not dependent on the male. And those reverberations on a mystical level are all over the place in Judaism, in Torah, in the Kabbalah, all over the place. The concept of female being equal, female being diminished, dependent, and female being restored to equality. I'll give you one hint, but I'm not going there. The sun and the moon. They were originally equal, luminaries, brightness, givers of light. The moon is diminished. That's the female force. Even the word for moon is female, Levana. And we pray every Kiddush Levana, the beginning of the month, and men go out and pray that the moon should be restored, so it should be like the sun. Same pattern in play. It goes through many areas of Torah. You will find it beneath the surface in many, many places. But here's the classic story. The woman and the man are now in a state of inequality, imbalance. So, that's it. God just said, and that's it. You guys messed up, so that's your situation. That's not Torah. Torah is not a story of how we got to be the way we are today. Torah, that's not what Torah is for. Torah is instructions. Torah is a way of life. Torah is a guideline, a whole system that is geared to one end. The goal of Torah is to get us to operate through the mitzvahs in a way that brings us back to the level of Adam and Chava before the sin. In other words, the whole point of the mitzvahs of Torah is to do tikkun on the sin and its terrible ramifications. So if you're going on the simplest literal level, because you could go way deep, if the literal ramification is that man and woman became unequal, and it became easy for man to take advantage of women because they were dependent physically, and for protection, and for food, okay? And they were weak and helpless, right? So if that's the literal ramifications, the whole point of Torah is to set up a system governed by laws that undo the sin, that bring us back to undo the curse, so to speak. Bring us back to a madrega of what we call Adam, Harishon, Kodem, Hachet. The whole point of Torah is to get you back to the level of Adam, the original man prior to the sin. So you would expect to find in Torah laws in place that restore the dignity and the independence and the leverage to women, even if they're weaker and dependent and helpless. And voila, look what you got. You have rabbis teaching and interpreting and laws directly in the Torah itself that limit the man. They forbid a man the following. These are all the things forbidden to a man. To ensure that because a woman's weaker, you cannot take advantage of her. So a man is forbidden to do the following. He is forbidden to look at a woman who is not any part of her body that's supposed to be covered, that's not covered, which basically is most of it, from the neck to the elbows to the knees. He's not allowed to look. If she walks into the room and says, naked, and she says, please look at me, he himself says, I'm not allowed to. Even if she doesn't care, because he is forbidden from getting pleasure from her, sexual pleasure, physical, whatever it is, stimulation. He's forbidden. He's not allowed to grant himself that pleasure. He's not allowed to be alone with a woman, whether she lets or not. He's not allowed to hear a woman sing alone without a microphone. One woman, it's different if you're in a concert with a lot of people. The halach is one woman that you can see in front of your eyes, identifiable, singing straight. He's not allowed to listen. He's not allowed to touch her, even if she doesn't care. And she says, please, do whatever you want. In other words, a man is not allowed to derive one iota of physical or sensual pleasure from a woman. That's an obligation on him. Unless he makes a commitment to her. Commitment is not engagement. A commitment is marriage, food, clothing, shelter, forever. Signed on the dotted line. It's not about him getting what he wants at her disadvantage. He is forbidden. He must commit to protect her in all ways. And by the way, food, clothing, shelter, and sexual rights. And then when he signs on the dotted line, and notice nobody signed anything at the chuppah, we didn't sign anything, it's not our obligation, he's obligated. Right?
Yeah, but then he makes the rule that you have to wear the clothes down to here.
He didn't make the rule.
Who made the rules?
So first of all, no questions now, right? But first of all, it was the rabbis, listen to this, you will not find directly in the Torah the laws directly stated, the laws of yichud, the laws of negiah, being alone, touching, kol isha, they're not directly. The rabbis limited themselves. The Torah is true because what man in his right mind would say, I will impose laws, right, that I'm making up out of clear blue, I'm not deriving them from the Torah, and they deny me and all other men pleasure. Why would men do that? Because it's the Torah, because the Torah alludes to these things, and the Torah, and they understood how to read the Torah and what the laws meant. They denied themselves every normal pleasure that a man would want. The rabbis forbade it for themselves. Because the thinking is, it's not our right. Because we're stronger, and they're weak, and they're dependent on us. We could really do whatever we want. It's not our right. We have no right. In fact, if we deny ourselves these things, you know what happens? You meet a woman who you're not married to, who you haven't signed on the dotted line. The only relationship you can have with her is talking. Okay, there's no physical contact. There's nothing sexual. You can have a work relationship. You might even have a warm relationship. A compassionate relationship. Anything that leads to any other type of behavior, out. Now, once you're married, look at this. The craziest laws of all, but the most impressive of all, the laws of family purity. When a woman gets her period, the man is prohibited, right, to be with her. Now, how does he know when she does or doesn't have her period? There's no laws in place that she has to prove it, that Beis Din has to check her, he has to show some kind of proof. Zero. It's on her word. Period. It's on her word, and that's it. I'm tameh. I am not available right now. Okay? And the man has absolutely no leverage. If she says it, it is a fact. End of story. There's no one who can check her, no one who can test her, no one who can verify it. There's no laws like that. It's on her word. And he's stuck. And as long as she's in that state, there's nothing he can do about it until she goes to the mikveh, and then their relationship can resume. The rabbis, because we lost expertise in various types of discharges and bloods, that we used to know the difference between various discharges and bloods in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, were concerned, the women were concerned, that although the period might have ended, after 5 or 6 days, there was some type of discharge. Maybe it was period blood, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was something tamei, maybe it was not tamei, but they didn't know. Said, you know what, let's push it another 7 days. That we'll have 7 clean days. That we'll check, we'll make sure we're clean for 7 days before we go to the mikveh. The men agreed and made it into law. Why would any man do this? It's against their interests. Because the women insisted and the women wanted it and that was it. In other words, there are so many laws that go directly against a male's interest, but what they do is they restore leverage and independence to the woman. So in a marriage, in that time period where they're not allowed to be together, what can the man do? He can't touch her. He can't force her. He could be taken to court and penalized and punished, all kinds of things. He's not allowed to touch her. When she says she's tamei, she's not allowed to touch her at all. It's a severe crime for a man to be with his wife in that time period. Certainly, if a woman does not want it, if she's not interested, it's forbidden, completely forbidden. If she's angry at him or there's tension between them, it's forbidden to be together. So what does a husband do with his wife in that time period? He can talk to her. He can't derive any physical pleasure from her. She has leverage. She's a person. She's her own person. She's her own person. She's not his property. End of story. Until she says, I'm back. And she goes to the mikveh. Okay? So you have laws in place that ensure that despite the fact that we might be physically dependent or financially dependent or a little weaker, nevertheless, built into the system is a certain dignity and a separateness and independence, because the Torah is here to restore the situation to what it was before the sin and before the inequality. If you think that this ramification of the sin, that when Hashem said the following to the woman, he said, El ishech tushukasech v'hu yimshol bach. Your desire will be to your husband and he will take control, he will control you. Right? If you think, meaning that she will need him and he will have more control over her. In fact, that's what it was for thousands of years till recently. We'll talk about that soon. If you think that this is a mitzvah, if you think this is a privilege, if you think this is good advice, if you think this is an opportunity, you're in for a big surprise. There is, first of all, no man who ever approached marriage with the attitude that I can dominate my wife because the Torah says I should, did not have a very happy ending to that story. Okay? In the Torah, there is not one case of any of our ancestors ever asserting themselves above their wives. It's only the opposite. For example, Avram wanted to not kick out his other son Yishmael, and Sarah said he must go, and Avram said no, and they had a big fight, and the Torah says Vayera Hadavar was terrible in Avram's eyes, and he vehemently disagreed, and Hashem said, listen to Sarah. So you know what he did? He did. Then it came to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak wanted to give the brachas to Yaakov, and Sarah Rivka said, I'm doing it my way. So she did. So you know what Yitzchak said? He went to Esav. And she said, no, we're doing it my way. I'm giving them to Yaakov. So you know what he said when he realized it? V'gam baruch yeh. He's let him stay blessed. And there was not a word between them afterwards. Yaakov, all the wives named all the children. Lavan, Yaakov said, I better get out of here. This Lavan is not, I see he's not my friend. So he went to his wives, said, it's your father, you decide, do you want to leave? He asked them their advice, right? They fooled him. He was supposed to marry Rachel, she put in there Leah. He doesn't ever say a word to Rachel, Leah about it. He goes to Leah and says, what'd you do? But you don't see him talking to the wives at all, never a word. The women control everything. They manipulate everything. Miriam tells her parents what to do. Miriam tells Moshe what to do. Miriam tells everyone what to do. There is not one story in all of Tanakh that you can find that in any way is a narrative of a man demanding that his wife obey him. Not one. In fact, only the opposite. The great Navi, the Nazir, Shimshon, the Malach came to the mother. And she said, you're going to have a son, and he has to be a Nazir, not drink wine, not grow his hair. So the wife went to the husband, said, oh, by the way, a Malach appeared to me. He goes, oh, I'd like to see him also. She goes, okay, come, let's see if he comes back. So he came back, and the husband saw him also, but he appeared to the woman first. Okay? There's countless stories. But there is not one story of any of our ancestors who said, it's a man's job to dominate the woman. Because we understand that it's not a privilege and it's not a mitzvah, it's a sad situation that has to be fixed. It has to be fixed. It's because of the chait, and we're going back to before the chait, when things were equal and balanced. So far, does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what do we do today? Okay, what do we do nowadays with a whole different situation that's in play with women? Okay, for thousands of years, let's identify how this changed. For thousands of years, this was the situation. Women were helpless, dependent, vulnerable, and in general, because of that, they didn't do very well. Okay, in most societies throughout history, women didn't do well. They were treated like chattel, they were used for their childbearing capacities, they were given no rights at all in many societies. In some societies there were better moments, but in most societies they didn't rule, they didn't have the upper hand. In fact, in America, what year was it that women were able to vote?
1821.
1821, I think it was a little later. In fact, it was so funny, just triggered a memory. There was a YouTube, one of these spoofs. These two guys went to like NYU, like serious universities. It was scary. And they walked around saying, we're gathering signatures here. We'd like you to sign, remember this? If you're against women's suffrage. Now, women's suffrage means the ability of women to vote.
Right.
But it sounds like suffering. He said, we are here to abolish women's suffrage. Would you please sign? And countless women signed. Oh, absolutely. Women's suffrage is terrible. I didn't even know. So the point is that women owning property, women having any right to inherit, things like this, were for most of history. Not opportunities for women, and women definitely suffered and still do suffer in countries where there are no women's rights. The Arab countries, there's no women's rights, terrible. They're weaker, so they get it. Now, what was the story in the Jewish world? So when education was widespread, because there was some extra money and there was some peace and quiet in the land, women got educated too. When there was no time for education, the women also didn't get educated. When it was a commodity that was too expensive and too precious, and so nobody did. When it was available, women also did. But it wasn't, don't forget, life was very different back in the day. So when a woman, to wash clothing took an entire day, to make chicken took an entire day. You had to catch a chicken, kill a chicken, pluck out a chicken, boil a chicken, salt a chicken, bake a chicken. You know how long it took to make a chicken? It literally, how long does it take us to make a chicken? 30 seconds. Chicken.
Put the order in, pick it up.
Then put it in the oven, put
Then
sauce
I
on
give it to
it.
my housekeeper, and then she's got to do it. And then she's got, I got to help her feed everybody.
Oh, it takes about 30 seconds to make chicken, maybe 3 minutes.
All day. I've got problems.
So everything took longer. So there was no time for education. There really wasn't time to educate a woman. There was just physically not enough time in a day and don't forget, there's no lights burning all night long. You went to sleep when it got dark. So these are not indications of any type of discrimination or anything like that. What has happened is that things have radically changed. And we have to talk about the modern situation. And things will have to change also in terms of the role women play, because things are changing. So what has changed? Not in the Jewish world, in the world at large. Why today do women go to school, get degrees, advanced degrees, take great careers, work in excellent fields, make lots of money, have government positions, have positions of leadership? Why? What changed to allow for this?
We get smarter.
No.
Child care changed, household work.
What changed before child care?
Birth control.
Before that?
The Industrial Revolution.
Good. The Industrial Revolution. That curse of by the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread. Machines, industry, fast forward, technology, high tech, smartphones, okay, has changed all that. Nothing's the sweat of the brow anymore. Yeah, there are a few people mining coal still and stuff like that, but even that's mechanized. the whole concept of physical labor to physically draw out your food from the earth has totally changed. With a couple buttons and a couple calls, you're done. There's stock markets and hedge funds. I mean, this is, it's all computers, and anybody can do that. Women can do that. It's not about physical strength anymore. So now our physical weakness is not a deficit. It's nothing. It doesn't change anything. Suddenly women could compete despite the fact that we're weak, and despite the fact we might be sitting at home with a baby. You could do the same thing as men. It's all done, virtually. It's all done, by computers, wherever you are, anywhere in the world. When you call, those companies that some guy with an Indian accent answers, he's sitting on some camel somewhere in the middle of India.
This is Sean.
Right?
No, this is John.
Anything, where suddenly this whole imbalance is gone. So all of a sudden women have the ability to compete and make money and feed themselves. And when you make a little more money, you can house yourself.
Have your own babies.
Then, in addition to the technology revolution, which first of all, the technology revolution happened in the First World War, they decided, hey, we have machines now. Women into the factories. Men didn't change. They, you know what? We've been so unfair. Let's give them opportunities. Let's invite them to also make some money, work in the factories, get out of the house. That's not what happened. They said, we have machines. We need people. Get the women. They're machines. Women could do machines. They needed us, right? So they suddenly changed. Then there was no attitudinal change. It was a technical fact, the technical change. Then the big deal, the biggest deal of all was 60, almost 70 years ago, the birth control pill. Okay? This made it enormously easy for women to not have children, or to delay having children, or to have less children. So suddenly women had the ability to compete financially because it was not about physical strength anymore. They could not have children. They're free. When we say technology, we mean a microwave, vacuum cleaner, refrigerator, electric stove, washing machine, central vac, central air. The lights go on as it continues, okay? So, hey, we're free. We're free. We're just totally free. Because women suddenly were free. Women said, hey, guess what? We're going to college. We're free. Nobody changed their attitude. Philosophy catches up with reality. Now we are women. It was just how life progressed. Suddenly women said, we are available. We are going to college. We're getting degrees. Too bad on you. We're making money. And we're going to fight for equal salaries and stuff like that. So it's all changed. So now that women are in leadership positions in the world, and women are financially independent, and women can house themselves, feed themselves, even protect themselves. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands, because women are in the workplace, of sexual harassment laws on the books. And in fact, thousands of sexual harassment lawsuits clogging up the courts. If you look at someone wrong, if you say something wrong, if you touch someone wrong, you're finished. Women are protected. Women are self-sufficient. Women could walk around with a little revolver. Women could walk around, could take care of themselves. They could even impregnate themselves. So now women are not dependent on men. So what happens? So first of all, the good side of it is that when people do get married, ideally, it's not a marriage because of helplessness and need and vulnerability. I have to get married because otherwise I can't take care of myself, and somebody will rape me, and I won't know who will raise my children. I will starve to death, right? Which is a big concern. In the olden days, you had to be married or you'd die. You'd literally die alone, probably, in some conqueror or some tribe, some like gangs, kidnapped by some gang. What do you mean, a woman alone? Forget about it. That was a absolute. It was out of the question for a father to have his daughter alone with nobody to protect her. So he married her off to somebody. So now it's all different. So if people get married today, they get married because of compatibility. They actually want to be married to each other. So in an ideal world, that's a really great thing, because marriages are not based on inequality and dependence and helplessness and desperation. That's a really good thing. It also makes divorce way easier. Like, okay, I'm not compatible, out. Right? Now, first we're going to say this, before we get into what do we do with the changing demands of women in the Jewish world. But let's say, what does the Torah think about, what does Judaism think about a world where men and women are independent, don't need each other for protection and support and food, are both financially capable of handling their own lives? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's could be great, and it could be bad, depending how you handle it. But it's a tremendous opportunity. Again, marriages are based on love and compatibility, nothing else. There's no inequality in a marriage. People are very independent. A woman today could choose to be dependent on her husband, or could choose not to be dependent on her husband, but it's her choice. It's her choice. I could choose not to work, or I could choose to work. But it's my choice now. Unlike my grandmother, right? Right? So first of all, the fact that women and men are equal is more like how it was in Gan Eden, not less like. It's more ideal that we're not dependent on each other. Because our relationship should really be a meeting of the minds and a meeting of the hearts, not some physical necessity that you have to provide my need because I can't provide it for myself, so I'm stuck. And I have nowhere to go even if I'm not happy. So it's more in line with ideal living. But again, it's also very dangerous. What the feminists did is they were so enthused with their newfound freedom that they did the proverbial throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're free, we're going to college, we're getting jobs, we're making money, we're using the birth control pill, we're not having babies, we're not getting married, we're not having families till we decide to when we're 40. I don't know. So unfortunately, this was a disaster. And that part of it, leading to people who were alone, who didn't get married for a very long time, and then found that they weren't marketable anymore because your 40-year-old man still has an 18-year-old a huge crop of 20-year-olds who aren't going to think about settling down and wanting a father to their children and asking someone to commit to them for a long time because they're still in the bubble of I'm going to be free and do whatever I want for the next 15 years. And then when everybody comes to their senses and says, I'm getting older, I want to have children, I like the father of my children to be with them and help me raise them, and I like someone to be loyal. By that point, you've created a situation where the men say, what do I need this for? You got a million new ones that are not asking me for that. My grandfather used to say, because he lived through it, he said, don't call it feminism, call it masculinism. It handed the men everything they wanted on a silver platter with nothing in return, asking nothing in return. Here, have women, have our sex, have our freedom, have everything you want, have pleasure, and we don't give us anything in return. No commitment, no loyalty, no marriage, zero. We don't get anything in return. He says disaster. That part was a disaster for women. But the freedom and the opportunity, that was incredible. So, what I would suggest is, the people that have benefited the most from this newfound women's opportunities, or whatever you want to call it, is the religious Torah, or religious, even if from another religion, religious women. Why? We never forfeited the value of family. We never forfeited the value of marriage. Marriage is, we still have all those laws. Remember, you can't touch, you can't sing, you can't be with, you can't do anything. So what are you going to do? You have to get married. So we believe in marriage. And then we believe in children. So we have marriage and we have children. The high priority. But then we also have freedom. And we also can get careers. And we also can get education. And we can choose how to use it all and how to balance it. But we didn't give up the precious elements of family and children. So actually, the ultimate beneficiaries of feminism is us. I feel like I'm the ultimate winner from feminism. I have everything you could ask for. I choose to be dependent. I also value family and children, and husband and marriage, right? And I have the freedom. I don't have to be financially dependent on him if I don't feel like it at all. I could work, right? It's like the best of both worlds. We benefited because that's how it's supposed to be.
So you don't need the prayer anymore.
Right. So now the question is, let's talk about one more thing first. What about the new demands? Women should take halachic leadership roles, rabbi roles, this kind of roles. That's what's happening now. Because hey, I'm a leader in my field. I'm the head of a corporation. Why shouldn't I take a religious role? Okay. So there's no question that area is opening up. There are certain areas in halacha that women could be trained in, certainly things that have to do with women, like the laws of family purity, the women could get trained in. They're never going to be huge experts in these areas, and they'll have to consult with others. But they could get good training, good training where they know when they can answer a question, when they have to kind of refer it to somebody with more expertise. In order to get real expertise in these areas, it's a whole, it's 15, 18 years of long-term study. I mean, theoretically it's possible, but right now what they're doing is 2-3 years, like crash courses in a particular area. But always these women, if they have fear of God, they are cautious, because like you would never go to a doctor who didn't actually go to medical school and didn't actually do residency and didn't actually do internship, but they learned everything about the kidneys. Okay, you don't want someone who just knows about the kidneys. You have to know the kidneys connect to the heart bone, and the kidneys connect to the other bones, and you need someone who knows the whole system. So we're not just going to someone who knows about kidneys. So when they teach women, for example, at this point, like all the laws of Taras HaMishpacha, family purity, they're teaching them one segment. But there are ramifications in all other areas of Jewish law, which you need someone who has a proper background, which is 16, 18 years of study, to understand the ramifications. So as long as they know how to where it goes beyond their expertise, that's it. Then, but you are getting situations where women are taking leadership roles, and it's a fine line because there are some halachic limitations. Now, it doesn't mean because of inferiority. For example, a woman is never called up in court in front of a jury or in front of a whole court to be a witness. Never. The court will come to her house to talk to her, but she's never called up in front. Like a king, by the way, same thing. Never called up to testify in a court, right? If they want information, they take it privately. The Torah doesn't explain why. The Torah doesn't tell you why. You want to say because the Torah, it is discriminatory. It's not. The Torah doesn't tell you why. It's just a fact. It's a fact of what it is. So women are not witnesses in courts. And we do have precedents of women who take a position of doing halachic decisions, like Devorah, the prophetess. Okay, but she was very careful with modesty. She sat under a tree. There's all kinds of parameters. Modesty is a very big deal. But we do have precedents of women who are scholars and deciders, and so inevitably things will shift a little bit from the exact traditional role. But notwithstanding that, there will be still certain boundaries based on other halachic issues. For example, a woman can't really be a rabbi. For a very simple reason, many reasons, but here's one technical reason. If I'm not obligated in a mitzvah, I can't do that mitzvah and be motzei you. In other words, if I have a mitzvah like a man has to let's say to
Put tefillin on.
Okay, that's for sure. These mitzvahs don't apply to women at all. But let's say a man has a mitzvah, let's say to is preferably the man's mitzvah, let's say to
Say Kaddish.
to say Kaddish. No, I'm thinking of something else.
Make Kiddush.
Let's say a woman would make Kiddush too if there's no man. If there's no man, you're going to make Kiddush. But let's say, for example, it's the obligation, I don't know why I'm blanking out on this. Oh my goodness. What would be a good example of a mitzvah the man has that a woman doesn't have that he makes a bracha on?
With the minion.
Counting the Omer because it's time bound. So anytime a person does a mitzvah where by making the bracha and the other person says amen, they're included in that mitzvah. The person making the bracha on the mitzvah is obligated in the mitzvah. The person who's saying amen is also obligated in the mitzvah. And by saying, you're doing this for me, like when one person makes kiddush for everybody and everybody says amen, it's like everybody made kiddush and everybody drinks. Let's say a woman is not obligated in that mitzvah. So when she does that mitzvah and makes a bracha on it, she cannot, what's the word I'm looking for? She cannot
Do it for the other people.
She can. What's the word? Yeah. What's the word? Exempt the other people in the mitzvah. She's not obligated in it at all. This comes up as in the position of a rabbi when we do things, especially men do things that are time bound, that they make brachas on. A woman wouldn't be able to do any of that because the men are not. She's not obligated at all in the mitzvah in the first place. Then there is issues of standing in front of a mixed crowd and speaking in the spiritual setting. In a religious setting, we keep the sexes separate because it's been proven over and over and over and over again that not keeping them separate is distracting, and we're very careful, at least in a spiritual setting, to maintain separation. So it'd be very much like crossing the boundary to have a woman to speak on a regular basis as the spokesman in the shul. It happens occasionally. Women do get up now and then and make a speech, but to be hired specifically for that position. I even spoke in Australia, but I didn't speak from the beam. I spoke from the women's section, but I spoke to the entire shul Friday night. Oh, there are occasional situations. It's also a shul where people knew so little, almost nobody was Shomer Shabbos there. But on a regular basis, to play that role, this is something that isn't something we're comfortable with. In any case, to sum up, why did the rabbi say Shelo Asani Isha? Because it was hard to be a woman for a very long time, and they were sensitive to it, and the halacha tries as hard as it can to restore the dignity and the independence. What do we do now with the bracha? Right? Things are different. So first of all, in many, many parts of the world, women still suffer from inequality and from persecution. It's not over. Thank God we live in America, which is decent because it's based on Jewish values, okay? Which respect everybody's right to independence and freedom, right? So we're lucky, but there's many women all over the world suffering terribly, and we cannot yet dismiss that. There's still injustice everywhere, and women are the first victims, and children. Yeah. So that's number one. The bracha is not obsolete just yet. Even if theoretically the entire bracha would be obsolete, do you know when that would be? That would be Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, that bracha will be obsolete, because the world will have been restored to proper functioning, and there will be no such thing as a person unilaterally harming another person because they can.
In Judaism or across the board?
Across the board. That bracha will be obsolete, because it will be a world where nobody will be the misfortunate one, the unfortunate one who's, being mistreated by someone else who's stronger and in a position to mistreat them. Right? The bracha will be obsolete. But it's not yet ready to be obsolete. So every time a man says that bracha, and it's very cute. I remember my son came home from school when he was like in 3rd grade. He just was like, Mommy, I just want you to know, don't worry. When they say that bracha in school, I don't say it. He was hurt for my feelings, because the American sensitivity is this is hurtful. This is an insult. But it's not an insult. Not from Chazal's point of view at all. It's not an insult. It's a fact. Women have it harder, still have it harder. They are mistreated, and therefore the Torah is going out of its way to restore their dignity, and to the degree that we appreciate the difficulty of their situation, we're grateful not to have to endure this challenge, but because we get it, we take upon ourselves to do whatever we can to fix it, till Mashiach comes, and when it will be entirely fixed. Questions?